history they tried to hide from us. History is not just what we find in textbooks or what teachers tell us in school. A huge part of it was edited, filtered, or simply erased over time. Some civilizations left behind evidence that doesn't match the timeline we're taught. And some stories were buried because they didn't fit the version of history powerful people wanted us to believe. When you look deeper, you start realizing that the truth was never lost. It was hidden. For example, ancient civilizations were far more advanced than most people think. The pyramids aren't just giant tombs. Stone blocks weigh tons, yet they fit together so perfectly that you can even slide a piece of paper between them. They're aligned almost perfectly with the stars, and their construction is still a mystery. Modern engineers with cranes and machines struggled to explain how ancient people did this with so-called simple tools. The same goes for ancient South American structures, where stones were carved with laser-like precision. Some of these stones have shapes so complex that replicating them today would require advanced machinery. So how did a civilization thousands of years ago do it? Either they had knowledge we've lost, or the history books are missing a lot. And then you have ancient maps showing the coastlines of continents long before Europeans claimed to discover them. Some maps drawn centuries ago show Antarctica without ice, something impossible unless someone had mapped it thousands of years earlier. But who? Schools don't talk about these things, even though the evidence is right there. Another secret buried in ancient history is how many cultures had similar stories. Symbols and technologies, despite being thousands of miles apart. How did the Egyptians, Mayans, and Mesopotamians all build pyramid-shaped structures? How did they know about advanced math, astronomy, and medicine without ever meeting each other? These mysteries suggest that ancient civilizations were connected in ways we don't fully understand, or perhaps they inherited knowledge from a lost civilization that existed before recorded history. And while we're taught that ancient people were primitive, their achievements say otherwise. They understood the stars, the seasons, energy, architecture, and engineering at levels that challenge modern assumptions. But those details never made it into school lessons. Why? Because the truth complicates the simple version of history people prefer to teach. The deeper you go, the more you realize that ancient civilizations may have been far more advanced than we thought. And it makes you wonder what other truths were buried, and why. Some of the most mysterious secrets in human history lie in the ruins of civilizations that disappeared suddenly and without explanation. These places weren't just simple towns. They were massive, advanced cities with engineering that challenges everything we think we know. One example is the underground city of Derinkuyu in Turkey. This city wasn't just a cave. It was a massive underground world with ventilation shafts, wide tunnels, homes, schools, churches, and even large stone doors that rolled shut like safety vaults. Some tunnels go deep enough to hide thousands of people. Why did an entire civilization build such a huge city underground? What were they hiding from? No historian has a clear answer. Another example is the ancient city of Mohenjo-Daro in modern Pakistan. Scientists discovered remains that show signs of extreme heat, the kind of heat only seen in nuclear explosions. How could an ancient city be destroyed by a force so powerful? Again, historians avoid discussing it. And look at the Nazca lines of Peru, giant drawings carved into the earth that can only be seen from the sky. Some lines stretch for miles, forming perfect shapes of animals and humans. These figures could only be fully seen by someone flying or looking from high above. Yet this was done thousands of years before human flight. So who were they drawing these for? Another mystery is Göbekli Tepe, a site older than the pyramids by thousands of years. It contains massive carved pillars arranged in circles, with symbols and designs that suggest deep knowledge of animals, astronomy, and rituals. This site rewrites everything we thought we knew about early humans, but instead of updating school books, many historians prefer to ignore it because it doesn't fit the timeline they teach. And then you have places like Easter Island, where giant stone statues, some weighing more than 80 tons, were moved miles across rough terrain. Scientists say people dragged them, but that explanation is weak. Why would a small island society build hundreds of massive statues and transport them with impossible effort? These mysteries prove one thing: ancient civilizations weren't just advanced. They were doing things we still don't know how to explain. It makes you wonder, what else have we missed? What else were we never taught? History remembers who it wants to remember. But many powerful leaders were erased because their stories made the wrong people uncomfortable. These leaders were warriors, strategists, innovators, yet most people have never heard of them. One example is Queen Zinga of Angola, a ruler who outsmarted European colonizers for decades. She negotiated peace, led armies, and formed alliances that protected her people from slavery. Her strategies were so advanced that even modern generals study her moves, and her name barely appears in textbooks. She was forgotten. She was erased because colonial powers didn't want the world to know how powerful she truly was. Another forgotten leader is Yasuke, an African samurai in Japan who rose to prominence in the 1500s. He fought beside one of Japan's most powerful warlords, and Yasuke became a respected figure. But his story disappeared from history for centuries, until recently rediscovered. And then there's Empress Matilda, heir to the English throne, who fought for her right to rule during a brutal civil war. She led armies, escaped sieges, negotiated alliances, and paved the way for her son to become one of England's greatest kings. Yet history barely mentions her because male historians didn't want to credit a woman with shaping the English monarchy. There was also Hannibal of Carthage, a military genius whose tactics are still studied today. He defeated Rome in battles they should have easily won. Yet Roman writers downplayed his brilliance because they didn't want to admit they were nearly destroyed by him. These are just a few examples. There are hundreds more. Leaders whose victories were stolen, names removed from records, and achievements credited to others. Why? Because history is written by the victors, and victors decide who matters. But the truth remains, forgotten leaders shape the world just as much as the famous ones. And their hidden stories reveal a side of history we were never taught. Some of the most disturbing secrets in history aren't ancient, they're recent. Governments, agencies, and powerful institutions have spent decades hiding events, experiments, and decisions that changed millions of lives. And even today, many of those files remain classified. For example, countless documents released in the last few decades reveal covert experiments on citizens without their knowledge. Tests done on soldiers, hospital patients, and even entire towns, all without consent. Some experiments were so shocking that even today, only fragments have been made public. And then there are the political secrets. Wars started on the basis of information that later turned out to be false or manipulated. Entire nations were dragged into battles because someone behind the curtain wanted it to happen. But the truth wasn't revealed until decades later, when the damage had already been done. Even scientific breakthroughs were locked away. Technologies that could have changed the world were labeled as too dangerous, stored in vaults and never discussed again. Imagine inventions that could solve energy crises, heal diseases, or connect the world in new ways, simply removed from existence because a government feared losing control. Whistleblowers who tried to expose the truth disappeared, were silenced, or had their reputations destroyed. Files were edited, names erased, stories rewritten, and the public was left with a clean, polished version of events that hides the darker reality beneath. The modern world isn't as open as it seems. The more you dig, the more you realize that secrets didn't end in the past. They're happening right now. Only this time, the stories are buried under technology, media, and politics. History they hid from us isn't just old, it's ongoing. And once you see that, you'll never look at the world the same way again. This was Wishper's Truth, where history whispers again. For more dark history stories, subscribe to this channel.